Hello and welcome to the video. Today we're going to have a look at using set-driven key to drive joints whilst also being able to animate with those joints. The setup is a little bit complicated. It really only involves adding an extra layer on top of your joint controller so that the set-driven key can control that instead of the joints directly. To demonstrate why this is important, first off, I will do it without that extra layer. So if we have a look at the scene here, this is replicating a mouth. These are my mouth joints and controllers. And this is my jaw. So I don't have the rest of the head, but this is just one area to test it on. And I have my face controller here. And I've already made an extra attribute called jaw open that can slide from -1 to 10 with, and its default is 0. If you don't know how to do that, it's simple. You select your controller, edit, and add attribute, give it a name, give it a minimum and a maximum, and create it. But I've already done that, so we don't need to make another. So first off, I don't actually have my controllers connected to my joints, just because there was some value in going through that process. So this joint here will only ever be rotating. I could make it so that I can have jaw slide with it, but I think I'll make another controller for that instead. So with this joint, I won't create a parent constraint. I'll do a couple of other constraints instead. I've also grabbed this controller and orient and point, well actually a parent constrained it essentially to this joint so that it lines up exactly with it, and then went in and deleted that so that this is perfectly in alignment with the jaw joint. I don't necessarily need to do that, but I'd quite like it to rotate exactly in alignment with the joint that it's controlling, in this instance the jaw. So I've already done that. It's not a particularly difficult process, but I thought I'd just do that before we started the video. So let's create our first constraint so that this controller controls the jaw joint. So we want to select the master first. So I want this to control the joint. And I'll go up to my constraint options and I'm going to make a point. I don't need maintain an offset on in this case, but in case you haven't aligned your controller up perfectly with your joint, then you just want to make sure that you tick that so that it doesn't snap into a different position. So I'll do that as though I hadn't already aligned it. So now this should control our joint. As you can see, we now have a joint perfectly aligned with our controller. So now we are ready to make our set-driven key. I will first select my driver. So I'm going to have this face circle with the jaw open attribute as our driver. So I don't need to select that first, but I am. And making sure we're in animation mode, go up to key, set-driven key, and set. So I will load this face circle here as the driver, and as the driven I'm going to load in the jaw locator here, so load driven, and essentially it's only going to be the X, Y, so the Y axis that I will be controlling with this, but I'm going to load in all of the all of the rotate axes anyway, just in case I change my mind and want to have a bit of sliding around on the jaw. So driver, face circle with the jaw open attribute, and the driven So the child will be the jaw locator that I have here, and I've already constrained it, and it will be the rotation axis. So we are good to go. So I'll just check. I need my jaw open to be at 0. So I set that at 0. And I will set my first key. So key is set. And I'll go back to my face circle, click on my jaw open, put it to 10. And then I'll grab my jaw locator and I'll open the jaw like so. Let's keep it nice and tidy. We're going to go with minus 150. That's a big jaw opening. And I'm happy with that. Everything is selected. So click key on that. Go back to my jaw open attribute, put it back to 0, and you can see that the set driven key is now controlling the jaw opening. Now, this is where the first problem will start. If I now want to, let's say I'll put this at 0 in a second. I'm going to set a regular animation key, so just pressing S, and at frame 24 I will have the jaw open, so we've created some animation. Okay, and let's say I have this guy doing some talking and there's lots of keys on here, and I also want to animate this jaw. So at frame 12 I want him doing something else as well as using the set driven key. Now it might not be quite so pressing or appropriate doing this with the jaw, but when you come to use the mouth controllers and the eyebrow controllers for facial expressions, you'll use the set driven keys to drive those base emotional shapes, but you will also want to go in there and hand animate and tweak various parts of those shapes. And if you're unable to do that because of your set driven key setup, then you're going to have some real problems and headaches, and you'll have to go right back to the rigging process and redo a whole load of setup. So let's just try. So I'm going to grab my my controller here, set a key, and then at 16 I want it to be up to there, and I set that key. And you see how it jumps back and has essentially overridden this animation. And that's because if we look in the channel box here, we have all of our rotations marked as being blue, showing that they're already connected and driven by something else, connected to and driven by something else. In this case, that is our set driven key. So in order to fight this, we need to make our setup just a little bit different. So I'm going to reload this scene. And now that we have our blank scene again, I naturally have to go in and do my constraints. So I'll do that quickly. Cool. So now that they are all constrained and ready to go, there's something we're going to do before we create our set driven key. So before we go in and start making all of our facial shapes and stuff, we're going to edit essentially the structure of these jaw locators. So the easiest way to do this, I mean, there's two ways of doing it, but the easiest way is if I duplicate this and press down. And essentially what that's doing, if I go into my attribute editor, is that's grabbing the shape node. Now you might never see these, but you can see here it says jaw lock 1 shape. So I duplicated it and it made jaw lock 1, so duplicate of jaw lock. And I pressed down in order to access the shape node. So this is kind of like a hidden attribute. You have a transform and a shape node created for everything that you create, one of which holds all the kind of the translation values and where things are moving, and the other one holds all the other stuff. So the shape node would be that one. I'm going to delete it. And you see, as soon as I delete it, I now end up with this funny looking kind of node, a paper with an arrow on it. And it's very similar to what you get if you just take something and press Control G to group it, but you're grouping it to itself. It's a very similar node to that. Or if you select nothing and press Control G, and you just essentially get a empty node. The only difference with this is because I've created it from the actual object, it retains all of the rotational data, so it knows exactly where it's meant to be. I hope that makes sense. So instead of having to then reorient it and recenter it, this automatically knows exactly where it's meant to be, unless you didn't set it in the right location in the first place, in which case fool you. But this is essentially the same as an empty group. However, it's perfect for what we need because we need it perfectly aligned. So this is the important bit. If we look at our jaw locator here, so if I select this, you'll see that it has values on it, and that's because I did the parent constraint to initially align it perfectly with the joint. It inherited some values, and also our shape node here, our empty node, has those exact same values. But if I take this locator and parent it to the jaw, you'll see now when I select the locator, it has 0 values. So essentially this locator is now zeroed out. So regardless of how much you move it around or whatever, or an animator who gets hold of this moves it around, they can always just zero it out and it returns to its default position. Now this jaw locator is going to be renamed. This is going to be what we set our set driven key on. So that's the jaw SDK. Now the problem here is that can't be zeroed. So if we want to be able to zero that, then we actually need to do essentially the same thing. So we take this, duplicate it, and let's call this one SDK. And this one, it's just a null node, really just used to reset those values. So if I now go back and take the jaw locator, parent it to the SDK, the jaw locator is now zeroed out, SDK has values. And then if I take the SDK and parent that to the jaw null, you'll see that the jaw null has values, but the SDK is totally zeroed. So it might seem convoluted, but you do it a couple of times and it's super fast to set it up, and it keeps everything really nice and clean and tidy. When you're doing that same process for like a whole load of facial controllers, I guess it's a little bit tedious. So what you can do is you can grab one of these locators, duplicate it, and then press down, delete to get your shape node. And I should probably rename that now. So that's if I just keep it as mouth underscore for now, and then duplicate that, and then I can come in and SDK for you, and then for this one null, and then do the same thing. It was that one, yes. I'll just check the location. Yes, okay. So mouth locator 1 is parented to SDK, SDK to null. So I now have this lovely setup here. So what I can do at this point is essentially just take this top node, the mouth null, and if I just delete this guy out, where is it? There it is. If I duplicate this guy and just snap him into the right location, and I could just delete that, I could do that again, Control D, and then holding down V so I can snap to the center of the joint. I can create these lovely, clean and tidy controllers super fast. So I make one and then I can just duplicate away and make as many as I want, nice and quick and easy. That's kind of beyond the extent of this video, but nonetheless, I think it's useful to know because it will save you a shared load of time. So let's get back to where we were. So now we want to make a set-driven key so that we can control this this mouth joint with a set-driven key and still be able to animate it. So let's load up our set-driven key animation. Let's go key, set-driven key, and set our driver here. Will be our face circle with the jaw open. Our driven, if we now go to our jaw SDK and load that as the driven, and select our rotates and do the same process that we did in the first example. So we are, let's just check, we are at 0, everything selected, key, and then we want you at 10, and then we will select our jaw SDK, pull this guy down, let's go minus 46, and let's key that, always checking to make sure that I have all of the inputs selected here. And let's go back and okay, so let's do the same thing again. Let's set a key on the jaw open attribute and let's open that up and set another key. I'm just gonna set another key there. Right, cool. So we have that working, and now halfway down here what we want to do is set a key and animate it. So I can just grab my controller, which is also very intuitive for the animator, and set a key, and then here I'm gonna just slide it to the side just for the sake of it, and then zero it back out. So now what we have is the jaw opening and the, let's select that so you can see it easier. So we have the original jaw opening, but we also have our new animation sliding side to side, and they don't interfere with each other. So you can animate away freely with your set-driven key based mouse shapes, so my jaw open controller, and still have the joints underneath free to be controlled by the animation controllers. And because we've set the set-driven key up with these nodes above the controller, you don't select them by accident in your screen, because whatever you're selecting in your screen, these controls are not connected to the set-driven key system. So the animator can animate freely on top of anything that happens in the set-driven key system. So anything I'm doing here, it's hand animating and it doesn't interfere with the system. And anything I'm doing using this face controller here with any attributes I add, because I will eventually populate this with a bunch of things like a smile, for instance, and we'll have a frown and an angry and a bunch of other things. I can do all of that via this node here using just these sliders, and any other micro tweaks I make, I just select the controller on the face, and we are able to animate freely without fear of messing up the set-driven key system. So hopefully you got all that. If I think of anything kind of crazy that could interfere with this, I'll make a follow-up video, but for now I think that is everything we need to cover. So yeah, hope you got all that, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.